One, two, three.
Welcome to Scéalta. My name is Joe Austin. Can I remind those who have just joined us this evening that Scéalta is a joint production of Fáilte Fears to Hear and Feile and Feile. We're in the grandeur of St Mary's University College, and my guest this evening is Professor Peter Finn. Peter, thank you.
Thank you very much for coming.
It's a lovely setting. You couldn't invent a setting like this. Yeah. And I know you're very busy and you're running between one meeting and another meeting and all of that. So thank you for your time and thank you for having Scéalta here. I suppose the first question before we get into St Mary's, and I know you're a proud Armagh man. Mm-hmm. Are you an Armagh man living in Belfast, or are you an Armagh man who happens to be in Belfast?
I'm an Armagh man living on the borders of Down, Antrim and Armagh, namely the village of Moira. So, there's where I'm from. But my home is still Armagh in my head. My wife's from Armagh, her family's there, and that's where my heritage is. That's if anybody said to me, where are you from? I'll be saying Armagh. Yeah.
Very good. Bronagh, your wife, is also in education as well, and you've 3 children, I believe?
Yeah, Bronagh is the principal over in St Michael's Primary School on the Ravenhill Road. 430 kids, not an easy task. No. And yeah, I have 3 kids, not kids anymore. My eldest guy, John, works with an international company in Paris. And he's married to a French girl. He's gone. My daughter is a doctor, a medical doctor, in a emergency ward in a hospital outside Perth in Western Australia. She's been there for a couple of years. I suspect she might come home. I'm beginning to get signs of a little bit of homesickness, although the Australian summer, which they're in now, is probably going to keep her there for another while. But I suspect she'll come back. And my youngest fella, who's 20, he'd be raging when he realised I don't even know his age, but he's early 20s. He's a student here at St Mary's. He's doing business and hopes to go on and do further business studies beyond here and get into the world of business. So that's who we are.
Normally what we would do when we're looking to talk to someone, to have a conversation, is you kind of go into bits and pieces of their background and you structure the conversation around that. Your background is so diverse that we're going to touch on wee bits and pieces of all of it rather than, because I know you want to talk about St Mary's, which of course is your passion. You're very proud of the success of St Mary's, and we have a big birthday for St Mary's, 120 years old, I believe.
That's right.
So, but tell me before we get to that, tell me your own journey from Armagh to the grandeur of St Mary's. What was that journey?
The grandeur of Armagh. That's where it starts.
Armagh, yeah.
Well, listen, I think we all have innately a sense of place, where we're born and where we're brought up. And I'm not deterministic about it, that where you're from naturally leads to certain outcomes, but there's a huge influence from the town or city or townland that you're from, the people that were there, the people you went to school with, who you grew up with. All of those things have an impact down the line. I was born in Armagh. I am very, very pleased that that's where I was brought up. I think I was very fortunate. Now, you'll say I'm prejudiced in this regard, but I am in regard to the city. It is a place of tremendous heritage and history. And when you were growing up as a young person or a teenager, you know, you had access to stimuli, which I don't think you have in other places. Going back into the Bronze Age, Armagh, 2 miles outside of Armagh, and all the mythology around that. We all sort of knew about the Red Branch Knights and Cuchulainn and the stories. In fact, the local hurling club in Armagh is called Cahuillians. So there was that there. Every day going to school, I walked past a Franciscan friary that had been there from the 9th century, and you knew that it had been ransacked by the Vikings, and you knew stories about that. And then you couldn't be anywhere in Armagh and not see the phenomenal Georgian infrastructure of the buildings. You know, Primate Robinson was the Archbishop, the Anglican Archbishop of Armagh in the Georgian times, and built the Mall. He built the observatory, without which there wouldn't be a modern day planetarium. So, you know, life can be boring when you're young, but in Armagh, culture, history was all around you. Even things like libraries. Now, I'm no great believer in the British Empire, but there were wonderful museums there to British military, I suppose, activities all over the world. As a youngster, I remember going into those museums, regimental museums, and seeing stuff that nobody else would have seen. But again, all the time stimulating your thoughts, your ideas about life. So tremendous stimuli. Very fortunate, my mother and father, great parents, good family, a conservative Catholic upbringing. You know, my mother and father went to Mass, I went to Mass too. We weren't over the top about it, but we were Catholics, and it's very important to us. And go into the, I mean, we went to a cathedral. I mean, we didn't attend a small chapel. We were attending St. Patrick's Cathedral, and mind you, it's a grand place.
Of course, yeah.
Went to school, educated by the Irish Christian Brothers. Big influence, phenomenal influence. The Christian Brothers taught me the importance of education. Make no mistake about it. And there was a sort of a social justice message coming out of this. I came from a working class background. My father was a bus inspector, my mother worked in a shop. The brothers made it clear to us that there were two other grammar schools in Armagh. One was the Royal School, and the other was St. Patrick's Grammar School, run by the Vincentians. And they led you in no doubt as to where you stood in the pecking order, so to speak. And their mission was quite clear. The only way that you could get on in life was through education, through exams, successful exams, and that was a very important influence. But on top of that, I was very fortunate, Joe. At about 14 years of age, I suppose, met up with, got connected to, became under the influence of a man called Brian Valelly, J B Valelly.
Famous family.
Famous family, and a man who still has an influence on me today. Brian, for those who don't know, is an artist of international standings. Anyone who owns any of his paintings is a wealthy person, that's all I'll say. He was an outstanding musician, particularly on the Alien pipes. He was an organiser of athletics, absolutely phenomenal organiser of sport and all aspects of that. He was grounded in community. He was one of the leaders of the People's Democracy in the late 1960s. He is an intellectual in his own life. And there was me at 14 years of age, because of my interest in athletics and because I was quite good at it, I came under Brian's wing, so to speak. And there's a lot of Brian Valelly in me in terms of, for example, my international views, the importance I attach to community engagement, the importance I attach to Irish traditional music, to the Irish language, my broad political leanings. Now, there are very few Brian Valellys about this world, and I was very fortunate at 14 years of age to come in contact. We travelled to different parts of Europe together. Interesting story, we were in the Kremlin together in 1988. I didn't say the Kremlin, I said the Kremlin in Moscow. It has been, my journey in association with Brian has been an education in its own right. So wrap all those things together, Joe, and my upbringing in Armagh was an education.
So I asked someone from that part of the world recently about you when you were going to talk to you, and we don't divulge our sources ever unless we're getting bribed, and then we consider it.
Fair enough.
And they said you were destined to be a teacher. You had a thirst for learning. You were inquisitive. Nothing was kind of to be taken for granted. That you looked at everything and looked for, all around it and looked for the positives of it. So, did you have a sense at that age of 14 that you wanted to go on in education, that your life was going to be dedicated to education, or were you like most 14-year-olds kind of unsure what you were going to do or how you were going to do it? So is that a fair assessment of you?
It's a fair assessment. It certainly didn't lead to teaching. I think the aspect of being inquisitive is absolutely true. In a sense, it goes back to what I said earlier about Armagh. Growing up in the 1970s in particular, when I was a teenager, there were so many things to explore, cultural things to explore. I remember one day finding myself in the Archbishop Robinson's library, a place that very few people ever went into.
Yeah, of course.
And yet there was this magnificent treasure about the history of Armagh, the maps, the old times. Or going down to the Armagh County Museum with all what I explained earlier, the regimental material, or the cannon sitting in the middle of the mall, all the time, yes, asking questions, trying to make connections, trying to put things together to get answers that were true, as opposed to just accepting what I was told. So that's true, and it's still true today. It's important that you take a wide variety of perspectives, that you respect other people's views that may not be close to your own. But you've got to see the value in those views, and you've got to understand where people are coming from, because you may not necessarily be right. And sometimes, Joe, actually you have to change your mind, and you've got to say, listen, I got it wrong. That can be very difficult, but you've got to do it, because if you don't do it, it's just not the truth, and it's not going to get at good outcomes. So I suppose those early traits in my teenagers followed through to today as well.
And about that age, I am also told you fell in love with the GAA. A love that you maintain to this very day.
Yes and no.
Okay.
Life's a little more. I fell in love with the NACAI, the National Athletic and Cultural Association of Ireland. That's where I met Brian. I fell in love with track and field athletics. I fell in love with the vision of those people who did not want to see athletics in Ireland partitioned. I very much committed myself as a competitor, and later on as somebody who was involved in administration, to do whatever we could to break what happened in 1932 to athletics. The NACI was established in 1922 and brought together disparate elements of athletics on the island of Ireland in a unified All-Ireland status, and functioned really well. Gold medals, for example, in Los Angeles with Bob Tisdale and the great Pat O'Callaghan in the Hammer. But in 1932, the British Athletics Board managed to introduce what's called the political boundary rule into sport, into athletics, and that meant that the NSCA had a choice, and the choice was accept the political boundary rule or be isolated from international competition. And the people at that time decided that they were going to be isolated, and in a sense I was, even when I was competing, we were isolated. But I'm a great believer that all sport on the island of Ireland should be unified. Now, the connection then to the GAA is, well, I went to Christian Brothers School. If you're tall and you've got speed and a wee bit of strength and some little bit of ability, you play Gaelic football or hurling. There's no way out of it. The brothers just insisted. There's a lovely story. I remember that I was an A-level pupil, and I had put myself and a couple of other people, the brothers had, into a public speaking competition, and the reward for that, the brother that was leading it, P.P. McFarland, the winners were to get to Brussels, so he was putting all his effort into this. But I was also on the McLaren football team for Brother Kelly, and then two things happened on the same day, and I was sick. I really genuinely had the flu. So I turned up at the brother's house, and I was trying to make my excuse not to play the football, but that I could go ahead and do the public speaking. It was in Cavan, and the outcome was no. Sick or no sick,
You're playing.
I was going to Monaghan to play against the Cavan team in Monaghan, and Brother Kelly would then take me in a car and drive me and hand me over to Brother McFarlane, and then I would perform in the public speaking competition. That's that's an indication of the extent to which I knew my place, and I knew exactly what to do, was to go along with both of them. But I played Gaelic football, yes, for the school. Had to play Gaelic football. I wasn't terribly good at it, Joe. I was physically strong, I was quick, really quick. And when through school, I played alongside a guy called John Corvin, who was outstanding. So John Corvin and myself played at midfield. John did all the work. He had tremendous ball control, tremendous skills, but he knew that I had speed. And all I had to do was break off my marker. John would spot me, and with simple brute ignorance, toe to hand, at speed, back of the net. And I did manage to score goals and points by doing that, but I didn't have the skills that the other guys had. But
Well, I'm surprised at that, because you later on emerged and very influential in St Paul's in Belfast, and of course there's a very fine record of St Mary's GAA successes. But before we go to that, we interviewed a while ago a young student from here for Scéalta. He was a County Down young lad, and he was talking, young man, and he was talking about arriving in Belfast as a student, as opposed to coming in for the day with your mother and father, maybe near Christmas and going back out again, and arriving here. He talked about the ambience, the family atmosphere that he felt in St Mary's, that kind of, as he described it, almost like a safety net. If you didn't know everybody, you certainly knew somebody. And there was a very warm, a creative, warm feeling about the college, around people coming in, and maybe not just fitting in right away. But I want to ask you, does that stem from, it's good practice of course, but does it stem from your own student experience? Would you have been like that when you came to university?
No, I went to a large university and I would have found it very different than St Mary's is. What you're describing, without using the word, Joe, I think is the term ethos.
Yeah.
Now I have a little bit of, no, I have more than a little bit of a connection with Greek Cypriots in Cyprus. Some of the best friends in my life are in Cyprus. My home in Macinmoira is called Anorthosis in ancient Greek. So I have a big connection with her. And the word ethos interests me because it's from an ancient Greek word with a collection of different words, one of which would refer to ethika, the right and wrong. Another one would be about place and character. So that word ethos for me really means the character, the ambience, the very things that you have just said. And we do set out here to have an ethos which is nurturing for students. I mean, that students are our business. In a sense, if we could use that term, some might say it's a vulgar term, business, but it is a business. Mary's is a business. It has to be a business. So our key business is students. Recruiting students, retaining students, educating students, and making sure the students get good jobs and good lives. So very much part of our ethos is the nurturing of students. Then there is the sense of rewarding our staff. I don't want staff working in here simply to earn their living. And I think it's true that the vast majority of staff really enjoy working here. They get something out of it. And they become part and parcel of the whole atmosphere here. And then we want the place to be welcoming for visitors, welcoming for everybody. So when you wrap those three things together, I think the young man that you're describing walked into an institution that explicitly sets out to have an ethos which is nurturing for its students, which is rewarding for its staff, and which is very welcoming to the outside. In my role here, I have welcomed so many people into this institution. One example would be Jim Allister. I had Jim Allister here one day in the height of the time when Stephen Farry was trying to close us. And I brought Jim Allister in here. And Jim came in at the end that he shook my hand and he says, "Peter, you have a great institution here." And he said, "I'll not be opposing you." But he met our students. He saw the place. He looked around. He saw the symbols. He got that sense of quality. And he's just one example. Sammy Douglas is a very good friend of mine. Sammy took our side in many a battle. Former DUP assembly member for the Newton Ards Road area. Yeah. And Sammy said to me two things. He said, one, Peter, he says, I was born not that far away from here. And he says, and I knew about St Mary's. He says, never in it, but I knew about it. And he said, if I had an institution like yours over Newton Ards Road, I'd be very happy. So he says, no way am I going to let certain individuals, get one over on you. So yes, we do nurture that. It's part of where we are. And I suppose St Mary's is a small institution of higher education.
How many students?
1,000, approximately 1,000 students. And that's very, very small in the modern day world. The good thing is, in the higher education system in both Britain and Ireland, there's a place for small institutions. I remember being over at Westminster one time, and there's a little award we were getting, and we had the Conservative Minister of Higher Education and we had the Labour spokesperson. And one of them said, the key feature of our education system is quality. And the other one said, and diversity. So we can have universities like Oxford and Cambridge, and we can have small specialist institutions along the whole range, as long as they have quality. Yeah. And that's really my job in here. My job is to say, right, this is small, it's not going to get much bigger, but it will survive and it will flourish on the back of quality. And I think the ethos is part of that quality.
Can I bring you back, because I'm interested in how you find these journeys and how you come to decisions and where it brings you to. And you mentioned with modesty that you weren't that great within the GAA, but you found yourself in Belfast, you found yourself in St Paul's. And again, we spoke to someone and they said he doesn't suffer fools lately. And what he brought to the club was a new form of training, a discipline, something that could be focused in, but it wasn't optional. And for Peter, and with Peter, you done it or you weren't there.
Yep.
So, and then of course you should take pride in the success of St Paul's, which you of course were integral to. How does that come about? So the athleticism that you had developed, did you bring it within? Was that not something that had already been institutionalised within some of the clubs, or was it something you had to fight for to get done? Or
that's a very interesting question, Joe. And things have moved on in Gaelic games a lot, but they hadn't moved on when I started. I was a fairly good competitor. My distance was 400 metres. I was well under 50 seconds, 49.3, probably my best time. That's tough. And 400 metre running is tough. So you've got to do all the discipline, you've got to do all the sprint training, you've got to do the weight training, you've got to do all the work that goes to make that happen. So that was my life, track and field athletics, for a long time. And then it started with Jim McKeever up at St Joseph's College of Education. Jim McKeever, legendary name in the world of Gaelic football. And Jim was taking St Joseph's team, as it was then, for football, and he said to me, would you help out on the physical training side? And that's exactly how it happened. I mean, I met these guys, and from my point of view, I didn't care what they were, how their standards were in terms of catching, kicking, or anything else. I saw them as athletes, and I set out to make them better athletes. Jim was the coach. That was Jim's role. So we worked together for a couple of years. We won the Sigerson Cup. Big thing. Smallest institution in the competition wins the biggest cup of all. And my role was athleticism, but also psychology. You see, this was the days before there were professional psychologists involved in this. The athletics went alongside a mindset, a toughness, an unwillingness to be defeated, a complete focus on winning. I was bad. When I competed over 400 metres, I just wanted to win, Joe. Yeah. Nothing, but nothing. It didn't matter the style. I remember the final of the Irish schools, which was a very big thing. I remember getting across the line and I must have been sick for 10 minutes. I mean, seriously sick. That's when you run into something called lactic acid. You get to the point in a 400 metre race where there's not enough oxygen getting around the system, and it is painful. I would push myself through anything to win. So that was the attitude I brought to sport. Yeah. So we won the Sigerson Cup. Jim Nelson then appeared in the scene and said, could you do something similar with the Antrim hurling team? I said, hurling? I wouldn't know the front end from the back end of a sliotar. He says, no, don't need that. So actually I did it again, set up with the Antrim hurlers. I remember the first training session up in Lockheil or Ballycastle, wherever. The first training session, guys, let's learn how to walk. I mean, that's where it started. It was basically about making sure that the guys were using the best of their abilities in terms of physique. So we had walk properly, then run properly. And the idea was that every single half metre would count so that they could be sharper. Worked on mobility, various form of mobility exercises that I learned to make these guys more mobile. So there I was doing exactly the same thing with the Antrim hurling team as I had done with the football team at St Mary's. That was very successful. We got to the Antrim to the 1989 All-Ireland hurling final. Yeah. I remember walking out that day and saying, this is crazy. I have no hurling in me. It's all athletics. The Antrim guys didn't buy into it until one day, Jim Nelson, God rest him, great man, we'd been away on a match somewhere, playing Galway, I think, and we stopped off in a hotel en route. And I was still having problems with these guys, didn't like to do the athletics training, didn't like to do the warm-ups, didn't like to do all the skipping exercises, the bounding, etc. And Sambo, by the way, was the worst, totally rejected.
Sambo McNaughton.
Yeah. If there wasn't a stick in his hand, it wasn't real. So we're sitting having breakfast, I think it was, and RTE was on the big television screen wherever we were, and they were showing the Tipperary hurlers in Central Park training. And they looked up, all 35 of them, and there was silence, because Tipperary had been trained by a hammer thrower, and he was doing exactly the same as me, the same speed drills, the same warm-up routines, whatever. And I just saw the penny drop. The penny dropped. The guys saw Tipperary doing what I was doing, and all of a sudden what I was doing was good. So that followed into St Paul's. Loved that. I have to say, I was up in St Paul's for about 10 years. Yeah. People of real character. Now I'm talking about character as in ethos, if I could use the Greek term again. I'm talking about the McCartan family, I'm talking about the Murray family, the whole connection behind St Paul's. got behind me 100%. And then the guys that were playing came from a whole cross section of society, but each and every one of them, Paul McErlean, Anto Finnegan, the Finnegans, the whole lot of them bought into what I was about, which was the same thing. I'm going to look back again. The first training session with St Paul's was exactly the same. Let's walk around this pitch and let's walk tall. Let's get the hips up. Let's make the best out of the physique you've got. So yes, 3 Antrim senior titles, 2 Ulster semi-finals, one of which still annoys me. One that we lost, and it was in Clonus. It was against Dungiven. And to this day, I'm still angry at myself in regard to some of those matters. We lost a Sigerson Cup final down in Trinity College against, I think, Queen's it was. We lost that one that day, and I still reflect on where did it go wrong, because the hunger to win, Joe, was huge. But that's what I did. I give it my heart and soul, and then I stopped.
But that in anybody's money is quite impressive around the GAA and around the successes.
Yep.
2008, you arrive here. Is that?
No. I've been about much earlier than that. I was appointed principal in 2008,
Yeah, okay.
but I had served my time at everything you can imagine in here. I had been out for 18 years seeing students and teaching practice. There's no job in here that I hadn't done by that stage. And yes, I was appointed as principal 2008.
It's strangely enough about no job that you hadn't done, which is, of course is the case. I was asking someone kind of what it was like to work with you, and they said it was great, except you have difficulty in language. And I said, well, explain that. And they said, oh, Peter doesn't know what good enough means, and he doesn't know what nearly there means. So obviously that skill that you had developed or you had in corporate around sport you brought. Before you tell me about your experience here, tell us just a wee bit about the college. This is a big year.
Oh yes, 120 years. You know, it's a long time for a small institution to survive. This lovely, beautiful trowel that I've managed to bring in today. This trowel marks the moment in October 1899 when the building work started here under the direction of the Bishop of Down and Connor. And this beautiful piece was lost at this college for about 100 years. And only last year, a Mr. McKeever from Clock Mills in North Antrim phoned up and said it somehow come into his family and he wanted to return it. So I've got this wonderful artifact, which you can't surely, which in a sense, you know, is the beginning of the building. And we're very proud of having that now, and that's got a special place.
And initially, if I have it right, it was designed to be a college, a training college for ladies, for genteel ladies, or ladies, well-to-do ladies.
Let's go back on that one. At that period, you're talking about the end of the 19th century. There's a growth of schools in Ireland, and there has to be a process put in place for the education and training of teachers. That existed in Dublin, but it didn't exist much out of Dublin. Remember, this is pre-partition. This is Dublin Castle. So the Catholic Church lobbied the people in Dublin Castle for teacher training for their schools. And we have a facsimile copy of a letter sent by the Chief Secretary in Dublin Castle in 1898, whereby he agrees to the establishment of 2 teacher training colleges for women. And they were to be in Belfast and in Limerick. Great thing is, both still exist. St Mary's is still here, Mary Immaculate College is still there. And specifically for women, that raises all sorts of questions about society at that time, which would have been their late Victorian, Edwardian. But however people saw it, that's how they saw the future of the teaching profession at that time. So the bishop here of Down and Connor, Dr. Henry, he called upon the Dominicans, who of course were already located nearby. They had St. Dominic's School next door and a primary school, and so they were already here, and they were asked would they take on the task of building a college here, which they did. Fantastic for those women to do that. They've built a magnificent college in terms of the quality of the build. I'm told they went down to the Belfast docks and bought the best quality wood. I'm also told that, by the way, that a lot of the wood that we have in here, which is Irish pitch pine, is the same wood that went into the first class cabins of the Titanic. I just tell the story that we're still here. In fact, when they were doing that feature film, the Titanic, the people came in here and asked to see one of our staircases, and they spent a lot of time deciding, would they use it, would they not? They eventually chose not to use it, but it was certainly up there because they knew it was exactly the same design of the time, the same wood, and built in Belfast. So yes, started off with 100 students, all girls. They would have been from relatively affluent backgrounds, yes. They were from all parts of Ireland. The beautiful thing is that when you look at the book of the first students, they're from Kerry, they're from Dublin, they're from Navan, they're from all over the north. So it's an all-island place. Irish is taught here from the start, which I thought was very interesting. And I reflected on this here one day, that this institution, which started off with those Dominican sisters, has managed to come through some of the great historical events of the last 120 years, the Home Rule crisis, the First World War, the Depression, the Hungry 30s, the Second World War. It's come through the social revolution of the 1960s. It's come through the outbreak of the Troubles, would say, or the conflict in the late 1960s. It was here at the peace process, and it's still here. So it's come through an awful lot. It even came through an attempt by Dr. Farry to close the place in 2015. Yeah. So here we go, a tremendously resilient institution, and it has to have a heart and soul to do that, and people have to want it to survive. So that's a long historical trend, and here we are, 120 years later, celebrating something very important.
And I want to spend some time talking about the future. I know you have big plans, but can I just ask you a question? And with all of that, and where the college is located in the middle of the Falls Road, you and the college are very much part of the community. You're very much part of Feile, for instance, just one example. And God knows what influences the discussions in Feile have had on the community, and the guests that come to Feile every year, and they have ready access to the college. Do you become frustrated when you feel that there's nearly a constant need to defend, from some quarters, to defend your very existence? Does that frustrate you?
Well, it certainly exists, Joe.
Yeah.
Whether it frustrates me or perhaps energizes me, I'm not so sure. There's a part of me that likes a challenge. But it's simply wrong that there are people who would present themselves as liberal people who believe in inclusivity, who believe in a shared future, and who believe in a shared society, that those self-same people cannot see the prejudice that's in themselves, whether they're prejudiced against St Mary's because it's Catholic, or prejudiced against St Mary's because it's located in the Falls Road, or whatever prejudice they hold. That frustrates me. If people were upfront and honest about what it is they're up to, fine. But these are the people who are pseudo-liberals. I've come to the stage now where I care less and less about them. We have fought a couple of battles with them, and we are going to continue here. There's simply not going to give in to them. And they need to learn the lesson that this is all in the new dispensation coming out of the Good Friday Agreement. This is a pluralist democracy. And pluralism means plurality. It means a number of different things. It doesn't mean uniformity. So it doesn't mean a uniformity of teacher education. I mean, this stuff that came out from the University of Ulster yesterday about, we have 4 providers, and that's dreadful, we only should have 1. Who says we should have 1? But there's 4 good providers, Queen's University, Ulster University, Stranmillis and St Mary's. Who says that's wrong? There are particular reasons why there are those 4 providers, and just accept it. It's part of pluralism. But we have people who just can't get their head around pluralism. But I think for many of them, Joe, I think that they felt that the Good Friday Agreement was about And the way forward was about this uniform approach that everyone will be exactly the same and we'll all get on together beautifully forever. That's not life. There are variations, there are differences, there are diversities in this society, and we're just part of that. So whether I'm annoyed by them or energized by them, someday I'll work it out. But one way or another, I'm not prepared to accept any challenge to this institution's existence, and I will invoke all forms of means of defending it. Ranging from ensuring that it's got the highest quality possible to campaigning or whatever it might be, but that's simply, I'm not prepared to lie down in this matter.
I think, and I'm not an educationalist, and I read the report that you're referring to, which I think is self-fulfilling. It's about them rather than about us, and I mean us in the widest sense. But there's also, I think, and I detect in it an element of snobbery. Just class snobbery, just that universities shouldn't be based in the middle, in the heart of a working class area, that they should be in the leafy suburbs wherever they are supposed to be. I want to move you on because I know you're anxious.
Well, I'm going to come back on that one.
Yes, please.
I think there is no better place for an institution of higher education in the Christian or Catholic tradition, which we are, than to be located in an area such as we're in here in West Belfast. I mean, if Catholic or Christian universities have a mission, it has to be a mission in a place like here. To be fair, St Mary's didn't always have this mission. I mean, to be absolutely fair, I think the walls were built very high and the trees were grown very tall to sort of protect St Mary's for a long time from the community outside. And there were good reasons for that, I'm sure, and the people who were in charge at that stage had their own reasons for doing it. But we have ripped down walls, we have ripped down trees, we have opened this place up. And I must give credit to the two people who influenced me in this regard. I was asked to attend a meeting with two Republicans, Tom Hartley and Jim Gibney, in the early 1990s. And they presented to me a case that times were changing and we couldn't remain aloof. Now, I wasn't in authority at that stage. I don't know why I ended up at the meeting, but I was there. Obviously somebody knew there was something in me. But I was sent along with fellow Tim Bartlett, and neither of the two of us had 1 ounce of power or authority in here, but we were the two that were sent. And they made such powerful sense. And they were talking about the Feile, and they were talking about the importance of opening up St Mary's. And I got it that second. I said, right, this has to be the mission of St Mary's. We have got to be absolutely relevant to where we are located. And I remember going to those who were in authority, making the case and saying, guys, we've got to change the vision here. And they accepted it. And the one thing I'll say about that relationship with Feile or the West Belfast Partnership Board is that St Mary's has changed as a consequence of that relationship. But so too has Feile.
Yeah, of course.
In other words, this has been a mutual change. I remember the early Feile that was in here in 1993-94. It wasn't great. And we brought in professional people, guys that were professionals in their own jobs, and they would work with the Feile people, and we'd work together. So this is one of my greatest delights about St Mary's and what's happened since the early 1990s, that this institution has been moulded and changed and it's become a very relevant institution of higher education in association with the West Belfast Partnership Board, in association with Feile and dozens of other organisations. But I think we've been part of their change as well, and we've worked together on that. And the place that gains the benefit is West Belfast in its totality.
I think we've all grew up together.
Yes,
I think
exactly.
there is no doubt about that. I should mention in the part of all of that, 2017, you became a knight.
No, yes. Well, okay. Well, it's a tremendous
Not
privilege.
a British knight.
No. It's a tremendous privilege. It came as a huge surprise, yes. The Bishop of Down Connor, Dr. Noel Traynor, brought me in one morning for breakfast and we're having a chat, and the Chancellor of the diocese arrived on the scene and put this document in front of me, and that's what it said, that I was a Knight of Pope St Gregory the Great for services to higher education. I just regard that as a privilege. I was delighted to receive it. Everyone likes some acknowledgement. So there you go, that's it. I don't run about calling myself Sir Knight or Sir anything. I am Peter Finn, and I will always remain Peter Finn. But yes, I have to say that was a lovely.
You're a papal knight.
I'm a papal knight. Yes, yes. Right, okay.
I think for someone who's in education, and you're right, it is nice to be appreciated and all of that. Which brings me, I think we're nearly at the end of our discussion, by the way, but it brings me to the future. Big plans, big events. So I leave that part with you.
Yes, there are plans. Let me talk about the weaknesses first. Let's be honest, weaknesses. St Mary's weakness is the size. There is no small university institution in this world that isn't challenged because of the limitations of numbers. Because of the funding system for higher education here in the north of Ireland, we are restricted. Our numbers are given to us by the state. If we were in London, it would be totally different. There would be 2,000 students here, at least. So there's a huge problem in this jurisdiction whereby hundreds of young people from this community and communities all over the north have to go and get their education in England or Scotland. And they can't get it here because the numbers are restricted. And listen, that's something that our politicians have to deal with. It doesn't impact solely on St Mary's, it impacts on Queen's, Ulster and Stranmillis as well. It's called the cap, the Mazin cap. And there's a reason for it. I understand the economic reason for it, but it's not good when I'm getting phone calls from parents from Andersonstown saying to me, listen, my son has to go to Liverpool. I want him to come here. I can't do that. But we are what we are, and we have to grow, and we have to grow in a different sense. First of all, capital build. We've put millions of pounds into this campus over the last 5 to 6 years, and most people can see that in terms of the exterior and the interior. We're going to build a student hub in the not too distant future at a cost of about £1 million, whereby all the student services will come together in one area, including support services for everything that students need. We're just about to open up new IT labs, which cost £500,000. The big expenditure is going to be £5 million on a magnificent new library, but a library not in the sense that we remember libraries. This will be open to the community. This will enable there to be sessions, discussions, plays, things like that. This is going to be a magnificent one, and I may be here to see the end of it. The dream I have, however, and unfortunately I've probably lost out in terms of the capital build project, is I would love to take that hall and turn it into a really top class theatre. And my plan would be to reorientate it from the direction it sits now out into the quad and have a beautiful tiered hall. Now, it was a choice in terms of the capital build programme between the library and it, in terms of which came first. The hall will come, but the library's going to come first. And I suspect, given my age, I'm going to miss out on the crowning glory, which is going to be the hall, but I think that would be wonderful. So we'll have this phenomenal new library, a very different concept of a library, which will be for our students and staff and visitors and the community. And then further down the line, we're going to have that. Hope to increase the postgraduate student offering here. That's the big growth area in higher education. So we're looking at a full-time postgraduate course in sport and physical education. I would want to extend the Irish medium provision somewhat in terms of provision for post-primary education. I mean, Irish medium is very well catered for in terms of teacher education, in terms of primary schools, but post-primary not so, and I think we need to improve that. So yes, Joe, we have a strategic plan for the next 4 to 5 years. It is ambitious, but you have to be ambitious because if you're not developing and growing, you're going behind. And I and those who govern this institution have no intention of being left behind. It's all about going forward, and that's just some of the plans we have for the future.
You mentioned earlier when we began the conversation, and you mentioned it as a throwaway remark. And I want to remind you of it, that you said you love a challenge. Mm-hmm. It brings you kind of up there. And has it been all a challenge? Have you enjoyed this period? Can you look back and say, wow, it's been great?
I love it.
Or is it a fight every day?
Oh, no. Fights are good things sometimes, gives you a bit of energy. I'd rather not be fighting, I'd rather just be developing. But I have loved every moment of it. The two areas that I've loved the most have been internationalisation. We had little or no international contacts about 25, 30 years ago. Now we have partnerships all over the European Union, North America, Africa and China. Fantastic. Community engagement. When I see people coming in here during Feile in the numbers, and when I see the likes of a former chief constable coming in here, having in debate, and of course we feed off that. I don't know if you know that after the chief constable met the late Martin McGuinness in here at debate, he came here to us, and we now have a programme going with the police about protection for safeguarding online, which the police deliver for us. So there's all sorts of comeback. The Orange Order was here many a time. I have now a very good connection with them over certain matters that we deal with. So that community engagement agenda has allowed us to grow as well. But no, I really enjoy it. And the last thing I'm going to tell you is I've got a special mission, and that is we've all these international connections, and they are great, and they're going to continue to be great. But I have now got the opportunity of a connection between St Mary's and the University of Bethlehem on the West Bank, and I'm going to bring that definitely to a conclusion. I've had conversations with various people. I'm now in contact with the head of the university, and I would like to extend that international dimension for our student teachers in the West Bank to be talking to each other. And that's the next international venture we're up to.
I want to leave you with your last question. Some of the staff call you Peter and some of the staff call you the boss. And you probably know that. Mm-hmm. And I was saying to them, what is he good at apart from his academic credentials? And they said, ask them how many pupils have come through the front door, and he'll give you an approximate number, but he'll remember every face. Is that a fair assessment?
And interestingly, Joe, I remember the face against where they come from.
Yeah.
I always ask the student, tell me where you're from. I will never remember your name. There are too many names, but tell me where you're from. And that's how I remember people. And I remember the students in terms of the question, where are you from? Tyrone? No, not good enough. You need to tell me a bit more. Well, near Coal Island. No, you need to go a bit more than that. And I can get it right down to the town land because I'm a geographer, first and foremost. But secondly, I spent 19 years driving around the north of Ireland seeing students in schools on what we call teaching practice. So that's how I know the students. I know them through where are you from? And that brings me back to where we started, that sense of place. So when someone says to me I'm from Ballycastle, that connects with me. That's hurling, that's various things that I associate with Ballycastle. Or the young student the other day who was in doing some singing for a carol service, and she said, Kaleshel. I said, there's a lovely football field going right down onto Loch Ness, isn't there? And you want to see her win. That sense of her sense of delight that somebody knew exactly where she was from. Yeah. Fermanagh, Tyrone, wherever it might be. My mother is originally from Monaghan, so I always keep a little eye out for the students who come from Monaghan, and I always make the connection, do you know St Mary's? As in St Mary's outside Castleblaney, and do you know Limgar by any chance? Now if they can say yes, we're on to a winner. I said, well, my mother was born in Limgar. So it's those sort of personal connections that allow you to connect with an individual. I don't use the names because I won't remember them, but I will remember the place.
On those words, can I thank you for giving us your time this evening? I know you've been very busy, you're rushing in and out of interviews and all of that. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I have no doubt we'll be back talking again. So Peter, from Scéalta, thank you.
Well, thank you from the St Mary's perspective. You're always welcome. Everybody associated with this community is very welcome in here. And I've enjoyed this conversation. To be honest, I was a little bit concerned at the start. I wasn't quite sure what this was all about. But you've been easy on me, Joe. So thank you very much for that. And thank you.
Thank you.